Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Karen Anderson. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
We're going to talk about dementia caregiving for mom when she's a difficult and or abusive, because I have a lot of clients that, they are in that dilemma. And so I'm hoping that after today, they'll have, a lot of good advice. And so we're looking forward to that. And but you actually cared for your grandmother and not your mom. Is that correct?
That's true. My maternal grandmother. I became her legal guardian in 2011, and she died in 2015. And it's not so much that my mother couldn't; it's more that my grandmother didn't want her to, and because there was. It was a significantly difficult relationship between the two of them. And it's funny because, that's more than 10 years ago now, almost. And I understand things differently than I did then. But my grandmother had 3 children, they're all still alive. And my mom was the eldest. And so it made sense that she would be the one. But as I said, I think my grandmother sensed that it wouldn't be a good idea. So I filled it. And if you hear that noise, that is not a child, it is my cat. Yeah.
And so when I was reading your information, I kept thinking, oh my God, you've lived my life. And so because I was the granddaughter that took care of my grandparents, and my grandmother had 3 daughters. But there was never a doubt that it was going to be me it didn't occur till my 40s, but I knew at 18, because at 18, I turned 18 and my birthday present was she hauled me all over the place and put me on everything, bank account, safety deposit box, you name it. I'm like, really, why are we doing this? Still young, thinking, why are you doing this to me? And the irony of this is going to be really interesting as we get going on. So, and we find that a lot of adult daughters find themselves in the situation.
Yes.
It doesn't happen as a lot, for grandkids, but it does for
Or sons.
Yeah, well, you find that women are predominantly the caregivers. Not that some of my husbands have not been phenomenal caregivers, clients, husbands. And so but we do have more than, their fair share, more than we'd like to have, of having those that are difficult, and are abusive. And so what do you find in this situation?
So again, like you spoke to, I think it's just what expectations are and conditioning that women, females, girls have had for centuries, a millennia maybe, that we are caretakers, that's just who we are, we're nurturers, etc. And so whether the mother and daughter have a difficult relationship or not, like that part still stands, right? That, oh, my daughter will take care of me, or my granddaughter, right? The female who is there will be the one. But why it feels so intractable for some of us is that the relationship is difficult and or abusive, and the guilt for an adult daughter to say, I don't want to do this, can eat her alive. And so it's like, and we probably will talk about this more, but they find themselves in this situation where they feel like they have like a no-win choice. The choice is either I take care of my mother and feel resentful and angry the entire time and put upon and, all the things, or I don't take care of her or minimize the amount of care that I provide and feel guilty and bad and shame and like we're in what everybody else thinks of me. So it's like, like what a choice to have, right? I'm either going to be angry and resentful, or I'm going to feel guilty and ashamed, right? Like it's not a fun place to be.
No, but it's not a win-win situation either, so, and but in counseling, clients, the goal is always to who can do it and who can't do it in a sense of they're still working, or maybe they're not working, or maybe they're just not the right person, and be
Right.
okay with that, and let's pick the right people that can do it, and so that I think it's easier on families if you have those conversations ahead of time, so that
100%.
it's so that it's not, you're in a crisis mode and then everybody's going, okay, now what do we do? And so but when you have that mom, or could be a dad sometimes too, that is difficult, difficult. They may have been difficult during their lifetime. The dementia only makes it worse. Or abusive, because I see that. I've had clients come in and say, "Oh my gosh, my mom is so mean and angry and abusive. You just can't be around her for very long." So how do you help clients like that?
Well, and let me also say that there are for some of us who they're estranged from their parent, right? They're not even actually having a relationship. And now they feel thrust into it. Like I have to, because I don't know what other solutions there are. So I just wanted to point to the fact that there are people who don't have a relationship with their parent. And that's part of it. It's not just like, oh, she's difficult, right? And we have a relationship. What was the question? Like what?
So what advice do you give, do you give people for those types of situations?
So yeah, whether you're being brought in and you've been estranged and you've decided, okay, yes, I am going to play a role in this, or you've had that relationship all along. I think it's very helpful to ask yourself, what am I willing to do? What do I want to do? Because there may be some things that somebody wants to do. Like, for example, I had a client who really wanted nothing to do with the sort of more emotional side, like visiting and whatnot. She's like, no, I just can't. I don't want to. It feels threatening for me to be around my mom, but I am willing to make sure that she has clothes and food at the nursing home, or, whatever the scenario is, right? She's more willing to take the role of making sure the basics are provided for, and knowing that, like, yeah, I feel fine doing that, right? So I'm willing to do these things. I actually would prefer to do those things. And here's my list of absolutely not. I'm not doing any of these. What's on that list is like a no, I'm not doing those things. I think it can be helpful in a couple of ways. One, it just brings clarity. But the other aspect that I think is really important is understanding your nervous system, your triggers, and instead of saying, you know what, I should be calmer, or I should be, this way or that way, right? Is to instead of trying to like make yourself be calm in our presence, right? Is to understand that is your body's intelligence, not something to fight against. And so being clear about, this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I don't want to do, I actually want to do these things, helps calm, right? It helps bring calm and helps you then be able to access your higher creative brain, so that you're able to come up with solutions rather than just be like, I'm freaking out, because I have to do these things. And when you're in that mode, all your creativity and solution, problem solving goes out the window. So it's like the clarity of that is, helps in a logical way, but it also helps on a nervous system level.
Do you find that a lot of this stuff has to do with continuation of boundaries that people have to set in order to coexist? you know, I can only do so. I mean, I can only visit once a month. That's all I can do. And it's only going to be for an hour and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you find that people are very, I guess the question is, do you find people are very honest about those sort of things more so, when they're working with you?
Yeah, I mean, I heard you use the word, I can only visit once a month, or I can't do this. And that may end up being the language that you want to use. But I would say think about that, because, I mean, a lot of people don't want to, and they don't want to acknowledge that they don't want to. But I am willing to visit once a month. And that's just for you, right? Like, that's just what I want to keep in my mind. I'm not going to tell my mother, maybe,
no.
that, right? But the thing to understand about boundaries, the most important thing to understand about boundaries is that it is never about controlling the other person, right? So many, well, why does she keep texting me? She texts me every 10 minutes. Literally, I have a client whose mother texts her multiple times a day. And, yes, if I could wave my magic wand and take away the woman's phone, I would, but I can't. So, right, the boundary then becomes, I am willing to answer a text once a day. And that's the action I will take. If she continues to text, the action I will not take is calling her back or texting her back, right? So it's knowing, like, I don't want to talk to my mother every 10 minutes or text her every 10 minutes, or even 10 times a day, right? Once a day or once a week or whatever it is. So it's the action I'm going to take or the action I'm not going to take. And for some relationships, being able to base it on a value and or a benefit to the relationship can help in solving or in setting the boundary. So for example, this texting, right? If you decide I'm going to text once a day with my mama, or I'm going to call her once a day, number one, you stick to that. But you also understand, for example, that maybe you have a value of quality time. And trying to respond to her text every 10 minutes or whatever doesn't support that value of quality time. And so the benefit to the relationship of maintaining the boundary of calling once a day or texting once a day is to say, if I uphold this boundary, if I honor this boundary that I have, my mother our relationship will benefit because I will give her quality time when I can, right? When I want to, at 7 p.m. instead of 4 p.m. or whatever it is, right? I mean, a boundary that I used to have with my mom was calling her every 2 weeks. That seemed like the right thing. That doesn't exist anymore. But at the time, I knew that I could give her my best, right? She gets me at my best, right? When we talk every 2 weeks, versus trying to respond all the time and then starting to feel resentful, right? Because then she's not getting me at my best. And I don't like, the question I love to ask is, do you like and respect your reasons for doing it, for having this boundary, right? And I do, or I did. I liked and respected myself. And then that value translates into my mother getting me at my best and me not feeling resentful.
So speaking of resentful, let's talk about, so now you're trying to do something you may not want to do. So now you're dealing with the dueling emotions of guilt and resentment. So, because I laugh and tell most people, I don't know about you, but I grew up on guilt and shame. That's how we were raised. And so my mom will still tell you that today. We were all raised on guilt and shame, so, and the reality is that really can really cause a lot of problems, in the future. So how do you deal with those emotions of feeling guilty for not doing something, but resentful if you have to?
So this is I didn't make this up. This is one of my favorite quotes, I guess, and it is from one of my favorite teachers. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate, and he says that if you have a choice between guilt and resentment, choose guilt. And I sort of take it a little bit farther, and I say that again, when we look at our values, right? Guilt, if you think about it, and you're a lawyer, right? So right? If we think about guilt from a legal perspective, right? Guilt is not so much a feeling as it is a statement of you committed a crime and you were found guilty of that crime, right? Stealing something from a store, let's say, right? And they have proof. There's a video of you stealing the thing, right? We caught you. You have the thing. You stole the thing. You're guilty. You might not feel guilty though, right? Let's just say you stole because you're poor and you have to feed your children, and this was the last resort. You'd be like, you know what? I did what I had to do. So that, like, being able to look at guilt here sort of panned out for a second, and based on your values, right? Choosing to talk to your mom, let's say once a day or once a week or once every 2 weeks, that is the only time you're guilty in that kind of a scenario is when you're like not in integrity with what you value. Does that make sense? So like, I actually value quality time once a week rather than trying to like scramble and get myself frustrated and resentful in the process of trying to respond to my mother's every whim. Right. So my value then guides it, and the guilt that I might feel because of the way I was conditioned, right? That just lives in there. That's just going to happen. Right. And it's like in that moment you say, oh yeah, there's that guilt that just is there because that's how I was conditioned. That's how I was raised. Like, isn't that interesting? Next.
Yeah. You let it go. Let it go.
Yeah. And it's so much easier, I think, because resentment is something that we sort of, it's definitely more corrosive to us. It's not as it's not a healthy emotion over the long term. And it is something that we have to sort of stoke and keep going. Whereas guilt, I think, is something that is, as you said, easier to let go once you have a different perspective about what it actually is.
Most definitely. So let's kind of close for just a little bit, and let's talk about maybe some practical, perhaps out of the box tips that you have for taking care of yourself in these kind of scenarios.
Well, yeah, I touched on the one about really learning your nervous system. I know that there's a lot more people talking about this out there now. But, for me, like in the last 5 years, really being able to understand like how a human nervous system works, just in general, allows you to have compassion for yourself and for others, because I liken it to, we are animals and we are constantly scanning our environment for a threat. And again, given how we were brought up, things that might have happened, right? We have exquisitely tuned triggers that don't seem to make any sense, but they're there nonetheless. And in general, I think the way that we've been taught is to sort of be ashamed or embarrassed about the way our bodies respond to perceived threats. So, right, like walking into your mother's nursing home room, like, well, what is the threat? Come on, there's no threat here. But the body's like, oh, yes, there is, right? Like, I don't know what I'm going to get, because my mother, is she going to be mean and angry? Is she going to be sweet and kind, right? Because I think a lot of us have that, like, which one am I going to get? Right? And from childhood, that's the way it was. So the point isn't to get rid of your triggers, because good luck with that. It is to know what they are and to be able to tend to yourself and like have that pause, that space where you're like, oh, I feel like I need to, I feel like my body is shutting down, and I'm like, feeling overwhelmed and confused, right? Like, oh, that's a sign that I'm freezing a little bit. And that's okay. It doesn't mean anything, right? And just that moment, right? And being able to bring yourself back into your body with very simple, like, it doesn't require anything that would look different or weird, right? It's maybe just simply holding yourself or putting your hand here or like grasping your hands. Simple little things to remind you, yes, I have a body that perceives threat here. I don't know if that is out of the box these days, but I think for most of us, you know, what do you call them? Civilians, right? It's not something people are paying attention to. And I think the more we can bring attention to that, right, we get to then say, yeah, how human of me. Of course, I'm feeling this way in this moment. And conversely, right, when mom is acting out and she's, you know, it's like, of course she is. She's terrified. I mean, I remember that with my grandmother, like realizing like she feels like a cornered animal, right? She's lost all her control, which doesn't mean I put up with nastiness, right? But like, oh, how human of her. Of course she feels this way.
Yeah, that's I tell clients a lot, you know, when you get that diagnosis of dementia, it's the loss of control that drives a lot of the behavior because, you know, it's scary. I can't even imagine.
I know.
You know, so most definitely. So Karen, if somebody wants to work with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, that's right there on the screen there. You can email me or go to my website. I have a very active newsletter, which I call my Love Notes. And I'm constantly giving advice, answering questions. It's kind of like dear Abby in a way. Excuse me. But that's the first step for sure.
So your email is karen@kclanderson.com?
Correct.
And then the kclanderson.com is the website, right?
Yes, KCL Anderson.
Perfect. Well, this has been really good, and I appreciate it immensely. And we look forward to having you on the show again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.